of you are. I'd love to just go through a quick poll. Site builders in the room? Anybody who describes themselves as site builder? A few folks. A pretty good number. How about developers? Wow, just about as many. Content editors. Spend a lot of time in the editing interface. Cool. Project managers. Wow, that's surprising. Thank you for coming. Designers. Okay, awesome. Wow, it was a good showing of all of you. Great. That's great. Helps me know how some of this, I guess, applies to all of you as we talk through this. Let me start with just some really simple concepts, but again, really fundamental. I want to talk about structured content, and specifically, I want to start at the very beginning with the idea of fieldable entities, which is something that I think is incredibly powerful and fundamental to Drupal, and something that makes Drupal so powerful. The whole idea around fieldable entities is that, of course, you have an entity or a thing, a piece of content to which you can flexibly attach fields. Really simple, somewhat classic example would be a blog page where we have a collection of fields: title, body, image, author, etc. Fieldable entities allow us to define whatever type of content we want to, allow us to add whatever fields we want to those pieces of content, are thereby incredibly flexible, but also highly structured. And this whole idea of fieldable entities being both flexible and structured is incredibly important for maintainability, for letting us separate content from presentation. It's very important for supporting future migrations. If you've ever tried to run a migration from just content that was dumped into a WYSIWYG versus structured content, that's something you would be really familiar with. A create once, publish everywhere paradigm, or the COPE, decoupled applications, native apps, and all kinds of things are driven by this very fundamental concept of structured content, which again is collections of fields on entities. Now, things can get a little bit more complicated with nested fields or fields within fields. And a few years ago, some developers got together and created a solution called paragraphs in Drupal, which is simply a combination of these fields within an entity that itself belongs to a parent piece of content. I'm curious how many folks here have used paragraphs already or are familiar with paragraphs. Okay, awesome. So all this is already really familiar. An example might be, in this case, a simple list, where again, this is a collection of fields that belongs to the parent entity, or a quote, an image, etc. And breaking content into these kinds of chunks lets us build much more advanced, complex layouts with more interesting combinations of content. Things like slideshows that might have a collection of images with their own captions, etc. More complex information, in this case, looking at location data and various fields about those locations. A flexible content area that has text content interpolated with image or video with a background image. A lot of flexibility, a lot of power comes from paragraphs. In addition to being able to add these kind of complex combinations, paragraphs gives us the ability to quickly reorder content on a page. So we can very easily change what's on top versus what's on the bottom, or drag things in a stacking order on a page. In short, paragraphs are structured and very flexible, which makes them very powerful from a site building and development perspective. But they're also really complicated. Here's just a quick example of a paragraphs editing interface, which probably looks familiar to about half the folks in the room, where we have one paragraph being edited at the top amongst a list of other paragraphs. You can hopefully kind of make out that there's the drag handles, so you can reorganize or rearrange these things in order on a page. When we were trying to do more complex layouts where we're managing paragraphs within different regions on a page, maybe from left column to right column, etc., things get a lot more interesting, or at least more complicated. I'm not even going to try to explain what's going on the screen, but it's a lot of nested paragraphs, and it becomes fairly insane from a content management perspective. Really powerful. We're still talking about structured content. We're still talking about content that's easier to migrate in the future, but also really complicated and not entirely easy to use. Meanwhile, of course, organizations are looking at other platforms and the way they're handling content authoring. And these platforms, I think, are changing users' expectations and have been changing users' expectations for a long time. This is just a quick look at an install of Squarespace. I think I was in this screen within 2 minutes of typing in my information. Um, really elegant, expressive authoring. And the content editor knows exactly what they're getting as they're writing content, and it just works really well from an authoring perspective. I still believe the trade-offs when we talk about flexibility, having open content, being able to own your own content, the trade-offs are huge, or rather the value is huge with Drupal. But the trade-offs are getting harder and harder to explain, harder conversations to have. So we've been talking about, how do we get to structured, how do we build a solution where we have structure, flexibility, and a more elegant authoring interface. And that's what we're going to get to in a minute. Before I get there, I want to touch on layout discovery. How many folks have played with the layout builder or are using the layout builder? Awesome, so a few. And how many folks are familiar with layout discovery or the layout API, which is sort of underneath the layout builder? Great. Okay, so happy to talk a little more about layout builder and maybe further or even after the session. For now, I really want to focus on the layouts API and talk about exactly what layouts are in Drupal 8. And layouts, again, being a component that's leveraged by a lot of other systems like the layout builder. So a layout in Drupal 8 basically is composed of a template with regions, regions being a header region, left column, right column. I mean, you can, primary, secondary, you can arrange these things however you want to, and it's doesn't need to just be two, it can be as many regions or columns as you want. So a template with regions that comes bundled with a library, which would be CSS and optionally JavaScript. At a minimum, you would want your library to control the column structure, to control, from a very basic level, the layout of this, layout. And then a layout plugin. And a layout plugin is a class that manages the presentation of the layout. There is a default layout plugin class in Drupal core and Drupal 8. It's called layout default or default layout. I think it's layout default. But you can extend that and create your own layout plugins that might come with options to help manage layouts. Layouts are already used by a number of systems. Of course, there's the layout builder. Bootstrap layouts, if any of y'all have used Bootstraps or any of the layouts that are shipped with the Bootstraps layout module. Bricks, which does some of the same kinds of things that we're going to be looking at in a minute, that was a module for managing paragraphs, and kind of stacking order of paragraphs. And then a number of other modules, including the one we're going to be talking about in a minute. All right. We started thinking about a solution that combines paragraphs and layouts and started thinking about requirements specifically. We arrived at this list, must-haves, must work with paragraphs, obviously. We wanted something that supports inline creation and editing, so it's really easy on content editors. We wanted something that allows content editors to easily move paragraphs into regions of a layout. It would also be pretty nice if it was drag and drop. If the editing interface looks something like the front end interface, so as you're editing, you have some idea of what you're building. And then finally, some capacity for more advanced layout options, maybe adding custom classes to layouts, managing regions separately, things like that. And out of that, we landed on this idea and created this module called Entity Reference with Layout. A few basics about this before we actually take a look at how it works. Entity reference with layout is simply an entity reference field. So it extends entity reference field. It's a new type of entity reference field that adds a few other properties for tracking layout data. It also, on the widget side, it extends inline entity form for allowing content editors, again, to edit content within the context of a bigger form or the parent node. And of course, this module uses the layout API. Okay, so I'll try, hopefully, to show you what this looks like. Do a quick live demo. You guys can still see that okay? This is going to be interesting with the screen dimensions. Let me show you a really small live demo. So it is responsive. We'll see just how responsive. I'm afraid it's not that responsive. See if that gives us a little bit more room. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick look at some development work we're doing on our own site and show some pages that should look somewhat familiar. Let's see if I can. No, I can't. Okay, we'll have to look at that. Great. So let's go to the admin content section. List of content. Going to add a new node. In this case, I want to add a case study. We have a typical, somewhat typical node add form. It's worth pointing out that this site has a lot going on with it. There's a lot of custom theme and custom functionality that's been wrapped into this. I do hope to, after we talk through some of how, or show some of how this works, show what this would look like in a fresh Drupal install also, and kind of what it takes to get to this in a fresh Drupal install. So I'm just going to start adding, let's see here. The hardest part of this is going to be typing. Great, so we have an image field. This image would be, if this case study shows up in lists of other case studies, we would use the image field here. Not so interested in that for the purpose of this conversation. I want to look at this content field. The content field is using entity reference with layout, provides the ability, this very simple option right off the bat, to add a new section. When you click add a new section, it launches a dialog. You're able to choose from all of the available layouts that are using that layout discovery system. We have some options that are provided by a custom layout plugin, which we'll get into here a little more in a little bit. I'm going to choose some simple options. Reversed means light on dark rather than dark text on light. Choose a red background color. Hit create the section. We now have our red section. I want to create a masthead, which is just what we're calling the top area of case studies. Select a couple images using the media module. And of course, if these were not already on my system, I would grab them and upload them, rearrange those, drop in the link. And there we have it, a really condensed version at this resolution. But you can kind of get the idea of how this works and how this looks as you're adding content. And it looks a lot like, in the back end, it looks a lot like the front end, which was, again, one of those goals. I'm going to add a little bit more content here to show how some of the more complex layouts might work. So we'll add a second section. This one we'll do 2 columns. We'll just leave the default background. Yeah, and what we're not seeing here is we have a left and right column, and these are collapsing because this is so narrow, and because, again, it is responsive. These are collapsing into a single column. Grab some text. Make it a little bit bigger. And drop that into our region. There we have it. We'll do the same thing for the right region. If we decided for some reason, it's a little hard to make this out, again, just because of the resolution. Let's see how this looks when we look at the front end. Great. This interface gives us the ability to quickly move these items around. So if I want this to be up here, right now they're stacked actually in the exact same region. So if this were wider and it was left and right, they would both be stacked in that left region. We can put it at the bottom of the left region. We can drag this text into the right region, etc. Lots of flexible capability for rearranging paragraphs within the system. That's a great question. So no, not a table, unless you themed it that way, which we probably wouldn't do. So the HTML is coming from layout templates, and you can actually create whatever markup you want with layout templates. And there are some systems like Bootstrap layouts where you can go into your layout when you click, for example, when you're adding a new section, and you have these layout options. One of the layout options that Bootstrap provides is what kind of wrapper you want around the entire layout plus each of the regions. So theoretically, you could wrap it in a table, then a TR or TD. That would get fairly complicated trying to manage it from here, but it's all templated. Does that make sense? So that's all coming from the layout template, and then the individual items themselves, the theme for those is provided by the paragraph template. Show us one or two more styles here. Next piece here is we're going to talk about key challenges in the project. We'll go to, we'll leave this as a one column, choose this 3-item list. These are all of these classes also, we have added these custom classes or this list to this layout plugin. That's arbitrary. You could add whatever classes you want. You could create your plugin with whatever options you want. We've just chosen to add classes as options for our layout plugin. And we have a list of classes that we can add, but then we also have this space for extra classes. So in the theme layer, we've attached special styling to this case study __ summer sessions class. Create a new section. Actually, give that a background color. Great, so we now have a custom, very light background color. We'll add some more markup. And each of these, this is probably maybe obvious, but each of these things that I'm adding is a custom paragraph type, defined just the same way any other custom paragraph type would be. And again, this collapsing into a stacked list on a wider presentation, this list is 3 in a row. Joe? Yeah, I'm not sure what'll happen if I do that. I can try it. Oh, good call. Yeah, so this is more like what that would look on a larger screen. Thanks, Joe. Hey, yeah, Nate.
When you're adding another item, there's a little icon that says like add image, whatever, those are paragraphs, right?
Exactly.
Did you make those images based on your paragraph type? So if I made another paragraph type,
you would. Yeah, that's exactly right. And you would optionally have to create another paragraph icon. So out of the box, there would be no icons. It actually just uses, when you create paragraphs, they have an option already for adding an icon with them. The paragraph module provides that. This just uses that icon. I'll add a section that has an image so we can get a sense for how that looks, and then move on to talk about how this works in, or what it would take to actually get to this in a fresh Drupal install. Actually, let me add this other text section too. Again, the system allows for specifying custom classes with your layout API and custom background colors. So in this case, I want light on dark again. I still want this special class for 3-item list, which makes the list tile horizontally. I'm going to add that extra class. This time I want the background color to be teal. It's going to be darker, which is why we reversed the text. We could have also, there's a lot of flexibility with the way this works. We could have also just as easily have chosen to do this same layout in a 3-column layout section itself. So what we chose to do here is just create this as a simple unordered list and then use those custom styles to render it horizontally, like as I was just showing. That we could have certainly done that as a 3-column layout, just dropping a text paragraph in each one. That seemed a little overkill. And again, this is all in the editing interface. If we want to move these up or down, we can grab this whole piece, drag it around. There's also these up and down arrows to make that a little bit simpler. As these pages get really long, that can become fairly complex, which makes those arrows really nice. And I'll actually use this last 2-column one just to do an image, something with an image. Ooh, I keep saying that, but then I run into something else I want to try. I'm going to jump into the layout section and this time scroll down to editing the region. So editing attributes on the region. I'm going to add padding to my region, which again is just using a class that I've created in the layout API handler, or layout plugin. I also want the text again to be reversed. Again, that's just a class we created that reverses all the text or makes light on dark. Change the background color to red. Update the section. I'll grab this other text. Okay, and again, that shows up as light on dark because of that class that we applied. Throw in one more piece of text here. Let's see if we have. Okay, so again, the goal was to make this, the experience more expressive, look more like what you get in the front end as you're editing content in the background, provide flexibility for moving elements around and for actually changing layout on the fly and for making decisions as a content editor about how you want to lay out your site, and specifically how you want to lay out content on a specific piece of content in your site. And we'll take a look at what this looks like in the front end. And there we go, looking really similar to how that was in the back end. I'll change gears for just a minute and show what this looks like in another example. There's a case study that's already been completely created. So if we just scroll through this and see the way content has been arranged, again, those different classes that we have set up in that layout plugin are allowing us to control the look and feel very individually for each of these pieces, which is very important. All the way down to a slideshow, which even the slideshow, as everything else, is simply a paragraph, which we can drag around. We can make it really tiny if we wanted to. Not that we would ever do that. But that gives some sense for kind of the flexibility that's inherent in that system, that approach. Questions so far? Please.
Yes, I was wondering, is it still a progress or is it stable?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is on a couple of live sites and it's still a work in progress. There's an alpha 2 release and it's on Drupal.org at drupal.org/project/entity-reference-layout. And I'll share that as one of the slides in the deck as well.
stable enough to start using field
I mean, I would caveat that heavily and say with enough testing, sure, we are. It is something that we are already using, and some other developers in the community who are not affiliated with my team at all have started picking this up as well. Yeah, please. You know, that's a great question. Something that I've thought about a lot is how would we move from, I mean, again, this is just a new type of entity reference field. So probably the way we would have to do that is to create a migration that migrates from one field to the other. It simply takes all of your content from the old reference field and puts it in the new reference field. Once that's done, I mean, the content should show up, it should work. You would just then want to go back in and drag paragraphs around into the layout that you want. Alternatively, I mean, you could definitely write into your migrate script a process Yeah, thanks for asking that also. Great question. So, and the question was, how does this relate to Layout Builder, and does this extend Layout Builder? This does not extend Layout Builder. And it is related to Layout Builder in that it is also based on the Layouts plugin system in Drupal, and it's based on the Layout API. Other than that, they're two very different systems. And this one is focused entirely on managing paragraphs on a node. If you want to be able to write paragraphs on a content type or write paragraphs within a content type and quickly move those around within the context of that one field, this works very well for that. Layout Builder is an incredibly in-depth, robust tool that allows you to manage essentially the layout of anything you could possibly imagine in Drupal. And it's a much larger, I would say, framework versus this is a module or an approach. Does that sort of help with that? This also is not incompatible at all with Layout Builder. So we will be using Layout Builder on this same site for constructing layout around some content types. So for setting up a content type where we always want the image to be in a left column, we always want the text to be in a right column. Those layouts themselves are something we would do with Layout Builder. Make sense? Great. Okay. Let's look at how this works with a fresh Drupal install. So the only requirements for getting this set up, and I did this just before this talk. First, install Drupal. Second, create some paragraphs. We created a contrib module a while ago called Stories, which is just a collection of paragraph types for storytellers. So that's what I used as a starting place. You can use whatever you like. Thunder is a great distribution that has a collection that also, in addition to a bunch of other functionality, provides stories, or rather provides paragraph types. So create some paragraphs, install the module, optionally install the submodule ERL paragraphs. ERL paragraphs really just provides a single paragraph type called section, and that's what in a minute we'll use to attach. We'll kind of walk through that process and use that to attach our layouts. And then optionally, again, you can install ERL layouts. ERL layouts provide some custom layout plugins. That's not necessary, but it's a good example of some of the functionality or capabilities that are available via layout plugins. Okay, so let's imagine that we literally just finished the install process and installed those modules. This should be a completely empty Drupal site. The first thing we need to do is go to our content types, not comment types. Choose the content type we want to add this new field to. I think basic page makes sense. Add a new field. Choose the entity reference with layout field type. Again, that's just an entity reference field. We'll call it content, we can call it whatever we want. That'll work. Save and continue. A lot of this is going to look like a standard entity reference or paragraph field. Number of options, we want to be able to add as many paragraphs as we want. Hit save. And then scrolling through this list, we choose the different types of paragraphs that we want to be able to reference. So we'll keep this somewhat simple. I want to call to action, an image, list of links, quote, text, and then section, which I touched on a second ago. That's that paragraph that was created by the ERL paragraphs module. Now, one thing that's a little weird about this module and a little difficult to get to conceptualize, I think, is that one of these paragraphs we have to use for layouts. We're going to choose one of these reference paragraphs as our sort of layout container, or what we attach layouts to. And in this case, we're going to use section. We could use whatever we want, but that's the purpose of that particular paragraph. There's nothing special about that paragraph except that it's what the interface is going to allow us to attach layouts to. And then we'll choose the different layouts that we want to make available. Now, these layouts are coming from the layout API. They are provided by the layout module in Drupal core. That's why they show up. If we were to install ERL layouts, we would have some additional options that are provided by that. When we created our, as we're working on our site, we have some additional layouts that are provided by that. Bootstrap layouts will provide its own layouts, etc. There we have the field. We will also have a few, I'm not even going to get too far into this, a few options on that field for the widget. None of this is really worth getting into right now. The one thing that is perhaps worth pointing out is if you're thinking about building custom layout plugins, you can create those plugins or those modules in a way that extends this form as well, so that you can manage not only do you get custom options with the edit form, but you can create the ability to manage what those custom options are. And time permitting, we can look at what some of that looks like too. All right, let's go back to manage content. Add a new basic page. We have the normal body field, and then down below we have the content field, which is exactly what we were looking at. The other example, and then just as before, we have a list of the layouts that are available. There are a few basic options that are provided by the module directly. I say a few, it's just two. Custom classes and hex code background. We're moving away from this in favor of using layout plugins for controlling all of this kind of functionality, but in the meantime, there are a few folks using this, and we wanted it to keep working. Set up a 2-column section. And just as before, we have these a little hard to follow on the screen size. Thanks, all text. There we have our image, and again, this can be dragged into any region we want. Something else that I want to work on is the ability to specify what view mode a particular paragraph uses in each region, and also to create mappings between regions and view modes so that some items automatically use a particular view mode when they're added to a particular region. As it stands right now, all paragraphs use their default rendering view mode. So that is a limitation at the moment and something that we're working on. Okay, so hopefully that gives everyone an idea of how this works and how this would work out of the box. We hit save. Well, once we give it a title, hit save. The content is rendered into, and hard to pick up on the size, but the content is rendered into that layout and into those different regions. All that makes sense so far? Any questions about any of that and getting this up and running on a default Drupal install or a fresh Drupal install? All right, and I think the last thing, let's look at just as an example of how layout plugins work. Let's see here. We're going to install Bootstrap. And also then install Bootstrap layouts. And this will give us an additional collection of layouts, which is what we were just talking about a minute ago. So I'm just going back into edit the field, where we can choose what layouts we want to be available. We now see this new list of all of the layouts that are provided by Bootstrap. I'm going to quickly select them all and remove these other ones. And then just very quickly show the impact that that has on the content ad screen. Back to content, go back to our admin content page, add some new content. Again, a basic page. Now when we add a new section, we have a completely different set of options, of course, for the layouts. And each of these layouts also ships with their own, so this is all coming out of Bootstrap with their own configuration options for how we want to render this layout. And back to that question earlier of how are these rendered, Bootstrap gives you the ability to say exactly how you want them rendered, what HTML element you want to use for rendering. And that's all coming from that layout plugin. That's it. That's how it works. Any questions about any of that and how that works, or how, I don't know, any elements of that? Quick list of resources. The module is available on Drupal.org. You can go to atten.io/ERL and it'll redirect you, or you can just go right to Drupal.org/project/entity_reference_layout. Couple of blog posts on our site that are about some of the topics that we've talked about today, specifically paragraphs and layout, as well as structured content. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming to this session. And the slides are not, but will soon be posted to this URL if you are interested. Thanks, everybody.